This is Gemara in Gittin Daf Chof Aleph, and we're holding in the bottom of Chof Amid Beis, 4 lines from the wide lines. As we continue in situations of figuring out a woman is holding something, is it hers, is it his, are they divorced or not? So says the Gemara, 4 lines from the wide lines, there's a muchzakais, if there's a presumption that the tablet is hers, we get the kasav alel, and the get is written on such a tablet. But the tablets are currently in his possession. What's the halach? Do we say that she was makneh to him? Or do we say no, that a woman does not know how to be makneh something, and therefore if it originally was hers, the fact that he has it right now is inconsequential, and we do not assume that he could use this to divorce her or not. So says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, on the first one line, touch him, I'll bring you a raya. We're going to bring a raya now about giving something over as a gift. There was a small village on the side of Yushalayim, and there was one elder person. He would lend to everyone, and he's writing with his own hand, writing, and other people would sign the document. So the story comes from the Chacham. They said that these are indeed good documents. He lent them the money, they have to pay him back. The fact that he wrote it is not going to change anything. He asks the Gemara, why is this true? Why is this true? We need it to be a document of acquisition. We need it to be that the Magna writes as ashtar sadai mechurlach. Answers the Gemara, elalav. So what must we have to say? Must be, as the last Rashi points out, we have a proof from over here, ki maknilei shabir dami. If this zakin, if this elderly person gives over the document to the other person, it's going to be good. Amar Rava, says Rava, you bring me a proof from this zakin. Oh my kusha, what's your proof? Dilma, as we turn over to Chav Aleph Amid Aleph, Dilma zakin shiny. Maybe the case this elderly person is different. Why? Shiny because this zakin knows how to write something. Why is that a proof to our case whether a woman knows how to write something? And you look at the tab Rashi spells out that what's the Gemara's answer? Shu chacham. This zakin is a chacham. And we know that it's not going to be a good shtar unless it gives it over. Whereas this woman, why do we assume that she is going to know the halacha? Where do you have any proof from over here? So Elamar Rava continues, the Gemara Rava tries. The second line. We have a guarantor whose signature is after the signing of the shtar. The halacha is that the person could collect from the chasim b'nei chayrin, could collect from mitaltin, could collect from not mishubadin, non-encumbered properties. Why? Because since there's no eidim, we assume there is no kol in such a case. But what do we see? He explains, if you look at the Rashi, the 4th narrow line, Rashi says what we see from over here, we see kol adam nami maknalu. We see that the assumption that any person is makna is in the same case over here. The high star shechasad by ariv lachar zman fire maser lemalveh, because this document that has the guarantor written was already given over. And how can we say that anything is guaranteed? It must be again that he was makneh to him. Amar Rav Ashi, says Rav Ashi on the 3rd line of Chaval from an Aleph, my koshia again. What's your proof? Over here is a gavra. He knows how to be makna. Why is that a proof to our case of a isha? So Ella Amar Rav Ashi, so rather continues Rav Ashi, I'll tell you the proof. Isha koiseves es gita. Says in the Brayso that a woman can write her a get. And the man writes this receipt. Because we don't care who writes the get, the kiyam is only with the signature, so even if she writes it, it's going to work. And what does it help? She writes it, and she's a makneh to him, and then he will give it to her. So here we have a beautiful proof that she knows how to be makneh, give it over to the husband, and this is the conclusive proof, says the Gemara. And we continue, Amar Rava. Apologies, we're having slight lends issues. Amar Rava continues the Gemara. If a man writes his wife a get and he gives it to his eved, to his servant, so what does it help that the eved has the get? And he gives the shtar matana, a document of acquisition of gift, to his wife of the eved. So she now acquires the eved, she acquires the servant, and lo and behold, beautiful, the eved is holding a get, and thereby she is divorced. Ken utai umiskareshes boy, says the Gemara, she acquires the eved and she's divorced through that. Says the Gemara, V'amai Chatzer mehalech, very good. She's kind of the eved, and the eved is holding the shtar. But why does this work? It's a movable document, and the halacha is a chatzer mehalech is like honey, and the halacha is a movable document, a movable chatzer, a movable courtyard cannot effect an acquisition. Meaning the eved, by all intents and purposes, is a chatzer. What are we trying to figure out over here? That when the woman takes ownership of this item, this eved, this servant, there's now her get is inside of it. So therefore, she is divorced because it's as if she took ownership and got the get. It says the Gemara, the eved is a chatzer malachas. It is by definition a movable courtyard, and therefore she should not be able to effect an acquisition with such an item. And Rashi points out that this whole din of chatzer malachas loikana is a din in Rava himself, who's asking the Shaila. So that's why the Gemara is assuming this would be a proof of that. It does not work. Suggests the Gemara of Achi Tema, maybe you're going to tell me, Ba'i made that the Eved is standing still, so he's not called movable. Anyone, if he would have moved, you're not kana. Any entity that there would not be a kinyan, if that entity is moving, there's not going to be a kinyan now that the entity is not moving. So how does she get this get by getting the Eved? Ve'hochsa says the Gemara, Pekapois, that the Eved is tied up, and that is the reason why we're assuming that there could be a kinyan via her accepting and taking ownership of the Eved. Now why here it says just that the Eved is kapois tied up, other places it says the Eved has to actually be sleeping, is a question for the Rishonim. The Amar Rava, 13 lines down, first one line is Amar Rava, another din of Rava. He writes for her again and he puts it in his own courtyard, and then what does he do? And then he writes to his wife a document of gift on the courtyard. He says the Gemara, she acquires this courtyard, and via the courtyard now she takes ownership of her get, and she is divorced. And it explains the Gemara Tzricha, we need both of these dinim. The din that she is divorced via the Eved and via the courtyard. The Iyashmin on Eved, I would have thought Dafka Eved, Aval Chatzer, but in the case of Chatzer, we would have thought she's not divorced. Why? Ligzar, there should be a Gzeira. What's the Gzeira? Chatzira Habal Achar Mikan. Because of a Chatzer that's coming from elsewhere. We'll see Rashi in a moment what exactly this means. But let's just finish up this line of the Gemara. V'yashmin on the Chatzer, but said the case of Chatzer, I would have thought Hava Mina Dafka Chatzer. Aval Eved, Ligzar, Kapois, Atush, Einoi Kapois. I would have thought we have to make a Gzeira by an Eved, an Eved that's tied up, due to a case of an Eved that's not tied up. So Kamash Milan, the Chiddush of the Gemara is that in both of these cases she is divorced. She either takes ownership of the Chatzer or of the Eved. So what was the first Havamina? The Gemara said it was an Havamina. We make Gzeira Atu Chatzer Abba Achar Mikan. So look at Rashi. Rashi, about 20 lines from the wide line, says Rashi, what is this Kigoin, for example? What happens if this husband, we'll call him Ruvain, takes his wife Rachel's get and puts it into Shimon's Chatzer? V'halach bal Chatzer. Shimon goes, umachar la es Chatzer. Shimon now goes and sells Rachel his courtyard. Ayinas la matana, or gives Rachel his courtyard as matana. In this case, in this case, the fact that Rachel took ownership of a courtyard that happens to have her get in it, she's not going to be divorced. Because who divorced her? The Mamegarish law. When the husband put this courtyard into the Chatzer, who owned it? Another person, Shemaim. So it wasn't her that she's going to have an acquisition of a kilu as if he gave it to her. So now when she takes ownership, she's not getting it from the husband, and that case for sure does not work. So you would think in every case of a chatzar, maybe they made a gezerah that even when the husband actually puts it into his own courtyard and transfers over the courtyard to her, maybe it also shouldn't work. Gezerah, this case, Kamash Mulan, that is the Chadish. And we continue 14 lines to the bottom. First word in line is Kamash Mulan, Amar Abaya. So Abaya argues in what we just said. We just said Rava learned that a husband could divorce his wife via putting the get either into his chatzar or into his Evan and giving her the Evan. In either case it works. Says Abaya, not so simple. Amar Abaya Michli, chatzar mehaychais Abayi. Where do we learn out chatzar from? Where do we learn out the fact that you can make a kinyan on chatzar? Mi yada, from her yad. Ma yada disa bein bedaita bein bal karcha. Just like her yad. The din is you're able to divorce your wife against her will. Av chatzira disa bein bedaita bein bal karcha. Says the Gemara, the same thing should be by her chatzar. Can be divorced. Bein bedaita bein bal karcha. It should have to work bal karcha. But what's the problem? The problem is in our case, there's no way to give a person a gift against their will. And just like you cannot give them a gift against their will, suggests and argues Abaya, therefore you cannot make an acquisition on the courtyard against their will via the matana. Therefore, you cannot divorce your wife in such a scenario. So Abaya argues on Rava and says you're not able to divorce your wife putting the get into the chatzar because the chatzar has to be like her yad. Her yad has to be bal karcha, able to divorce her bal karcha. The chatzar would have to be the same, and we know that is not true. Your equation doesn't work. We know she can make a shliach to accept her get, and that only works midaita, doesn't work bal karcha. We know there's such an entity. Says the Gemara, what's your kasha? Where do we learn out shlichus? The whole kasha was that chatzar is like yad, and yad is bal karcha. Says the Gemara, who says Abaya learns out shlichus from yad? Abaya learns out shlichus from a totally different place, from Xeris HaKasav. Answer number one, so that is not a kasha. Same answer number two, shlichus l'kabbalah nami ashkan bal karcha. There is a scenario where shlichus l'kabbalah is also bal karcha. Shkenav mekabel get lebita ketana bal karcha. A husband could accept a get for his daughter while she is a ketana against her will, and that's a form of shlichus, so that's not a kasha in Abaya. So ending off with a machlok is Abaya and Rava, whether one could divorce their wife via putting the get into his chatzar or not. We continue on the final line of Chav Amid Aleph Amid Aleph, V'chulu. Important to point out that the Gemara that we're about to learn is on the V'chulu, on the continuation of the case in the Mishnah, that the Mishnah said you could write the get on the hand of the Eved and give the wife the Eved, or on the horn of a cow and give the wife the cow. Says the Gemara, Bishlama Yad de Eved. I understand if the husband writes the get on the hand of the Eved, whether he did it via tattoo or other ways, and then he gives the wife the Eved. I understand that could work. Why? Because loy evsher lemiksayo. There's no way to cut off the hand of the Eved. So now he wrote the get on the Eved's hand while the hand was connected to the body, obviously. And he gives the woman the get while the hand is connected to the body. So the place that he wrote the document is the same way that he gave the document. Says the Gemara, I understand why that would work. Let's let the Gemara articulate and we'll understand. Ela Karen Shalpara, in the next case of the Mishnah, on the horse of the cow. Liksayo v'leisivla. Why is he giving her the whole cow? He should have to cut off the horn and give her the horn. Amar Cross, says the Gemara, you know why not? V'kasav v'nasan lo. We learn out a drasha. It says the pasuk v'kasav, and he writes v'nasan lo, and he gives it to her. And from here we darshan misheina michusar eliksiva, one who is lacking only in the writing of the get unesina, meaning a get is kosher when a get has to be written and given. Like every get, you write the paper, you give it to the wife. Yatsa Zed, this case will be exclusive. That what? When you write the get on the horn of a cow, then what? Then there's an extra step that is lacking. What is this extra step? You have to cut off the horn of the cow and give it. That's the reason why it would not work. And the only way it would work if you give her the actual cow. Because if you were to cut it off, then there would be an extra step that has to be done before giving it to her. Just to interestingly point out, look at the top Rashi. Rashi says, what's the reason by the Eved you can't cut off his hands? We would say, well, because he's a human being. Rashi goes very halachic. Rashi says it's an Eved Ivri, and he has mitzvahs, and you're damaging the Eved. That's why you can't cut off his hand. Very, very interesting. Let's just remember what we just learned. This is going to be relevant either at the end of today's show or the beginning of tomorrow's share, and the fact that we're learning there can't be another event between the writing and the giving of the get. And if there is another event, for example, having to cut off the place where you wrote the get, that's going to be a problem, which we're going to get back to. Now we have Rav Yosef Glili at the end of the Mishnah. He says you cannot write a get on Ruach Chaim or on Oichel. Now where does Rav Yosef Glili know this from? We're about to have a carbon copy Gemara from the Gemara in Sukkah that we learned. I actually remember this. We're doing Sukkah now in our Kinyan Masech this year. But we see this. It says the Gemara, my time. But where does Yosef Glili know his din from? Rav Yosef Glili, 6 lines down. Titani, we learned in our Brayso. Seifi and Sefer. It says you have to give your wife a sefer. Not have to. If one divorced wife gives her a sefer. Manayan the rabbi is called Dover. How do you know you can write to get on anything? Tamalai Mar v'Kosaf law. You write to her. That's what the pasuk says. So Mikol Makom, we learn out anything you write it on. Imkain, if that is true, my time is safer. Why does the pasuk articulate safer? Says the Gemara, Ma sefer davar shein by ruach chayim ve'einoi oichel. Just like a sefer is something which is not living and is not food. Afkol davar shein by ruach chayim ve'einoi oichel. So that's Rav Yosef Glili learns out that you cannot write the get on something with ruach chayim or something that is oichel. So how do the Rabbanan disagree? Because the Rabbanan hold you could write it on a living entity. V'Rabbanan, iksiv bas sefer k'dekamad. I would agree with you. Hashtag sefer. The pasuk says because of law sefer. The Rabbanan darshan the spheres devarim mahu da'asa, just telling over the matter. Sefer from the lashon of sfira, to tell over. V'Rabbanan I v'kasav my avdilei. Says Gemara, very good. What did the Rabbanan do with the pasuk of v'kasav? Explains the Gemara. Mibaylalu b'ksiva miskareshes ve'ina miskareshes b'kasav. One can only divorce their wife with ksiva, with writing, but you cannot divorce your wife with kesef, with money. Why would you think you could divorce your wife with money? I would have thought ma'avaya bekesef, as we'll learn at the beginning of Kiddushin in a few months. Just like one gets married with kesef, you would think divorce is the same way. Kamash one say the Rabbanan, you cannot. What does Rav Yosef Glili say? Nafklemi sefer krisus. From the extra word sefer krisus, he learns out sefer karsa. It has to be a sefer that severs, not money. Vein davar acher karsa, and the money will not work. What do the Rabbanan say? They need this pasuk for sefer krisus. They need it for a totally different din. They need it for a din that is a fundamental din in all of Gittin. Davar akoyris beina lebeina. At the only time a get is kosher is if the get severs between husband and wife. What does that mean? Kidid Tanya, as we learned in a Brayso. If someone gives his wife a get, someone gives his wife a get, he wants to torment her a little bit. So he says, guess what? Here's your get. For the rest of your life, no wine. For the rest of your life, you can't go to your father's house. What's halacha? It's not a get. It doesn't sever anything. He's holding strings attached to her. He's stipulating what she cannot do for the rest of her life. Therefore, that is not a get. But ad shleishim yoim, he says the same thing, but he says you can't go to your father's house, can't drink wine for 30 days. Then I raise a krisis. So the Rabbanan learn out. Sefer krisis teaches us a different din, a din that again by its very definition has to be koyreis, has to sever. What does Yosef Glili say? V'idach when koyreis krisos, they learn out an extra word. V'idach and the Rabbanan hold mikaris krisos loy darshi. That is the machlokes between Yosef Glili and the Chachamim, whether you could indeed give a get that is written on a living entity, and that is where they darshan from. Because of law, sefer krisos, because of law, sefer kaires, v'in davar acher kaires, etc. And we continue with the Mishnah. I apologize that our Gemara just ran away from us. And here is the Mishnah. Ein kaisvim, continuing the items that you're allowed to or not allowed to write the get on, says the Mishnah halfway down Chav Aleph Amud Beis. Ein koisvin. You're not allowed to write b'mechuber lekarka until that's attached to the ground. Kosvu b'mechuber, and this is the din that we alluded to on the top of the Amud. If you wrote something that was unattached to the ground, talshu, you cut it off. Achasmu, you sign it. V'nasula, it's going to be kosher. So of course, that's a difficult statement. We said you can't write, and then we said if you do it, it works. What does that mean? The Gemara will get to in a moment. Rav Yehuda says no, everything has to be when the paper is detached. You're not allowed to write law not on a raised paper of law diftera, not on a diftera, different types of paper, which we've already seen and we're going to see more about Mirz Hashem in tomorrow's daf. Says Rav Yehuda ben Beseira shuyachal is dayef achacham achshir. Yehuda ben Beseira holds that these papers have issues. Why? Because your yachal is dayef. They're able to be forged, whereas the Chacham disagree and they say you could write your get on these entities. Says the Gemara, let's deal with the first part of the Mishnah before we call it a day. The Mishnah began, it says you wrote it on something attached, but the first part of the Mishnah says, Ein kaisvin. The Mishnah itself blows up, it's a stira. Don't write it, and then it says write it. Which one is it? So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, two terutzim. The who sheshayir makim atayre. V'chein Amar Rav Aisha v'shayir makim atayre. V'chein Amar Rav Chana Amar Rav Yechon v'shayir makim atayre. That what the Mishnah is referring to, that you left over the place of the tayref. What is the tayref? Very important. Tayref from the word of Tyra. That's the way to memorize it. Rashi says this is the Gilui, this is the Ikr, this is the main part of the shtar, which is what the names of the husband, wife, time, and place that the get is given. So what's going on? Let's let the Gemara explain, and everything will become clear in a moment. Rav Elazar Damar Eidei Mesira Karti. So going with Rav Elazar, that what affects the get, the giving over of the get. This is what the Mishnah is teaching us. Ein kaisvin taifes. Don't write the non-integral part of the get. Why not? Shema yichtvu tairif. Because you might end up continuing and writing even the tairif, the ikr of the get. But now, if you're kasul taifes, if you messed up and you wrote the non-integral part, Talshu, you cut it off, kasvu l'tayrif, and then he wrote the ikr, 3 lines on the bottom of the white lines, v'naslan, you give it to her, then it is kosher. Why is it kosher? Because Rav Elazar holds the ikr is the giving, and as long as the main part of the get, the tayrif, the names are written appropriately, which is in this case detached from the ground, lishma, it's going to be good. That is the first answer. The second answer is Reish Lakish Amar Chasmu Shaninu. We're talking about signing it. We're going with Rameir that says the critical ingredient is the signing of the get. Last narrow line. Don't write the main part of the get. Why not? Because the Gzeir you might come to sign the get. But if then it is going to be kosher. You shouldn't do it because you might end up signing it. But if you end up writing it and then you detach it and then you signed it, then it's going to be kosher, utilizing the din of Rameir. 2 ways of learning what this line of the Mishnah is. Don't write. If you write, it's kosher. So both lines are learning. Don't write lichatchilo. But if you did it in whichever form, it's going to be kosher. Whether that means detached and then you wrote the tayrif, or whether it means you signed it. And we'll pick it up from here in the next year. B'siyata Tishmaya.